Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Just give me a second to get this going on the main screen and we'll get tonight kicked off. Brilliant. I'm just going to turn off our camera. Oh, what on earth just happened there? There we go. Apologies, everybody. So welcome to tonight's webinar. We're Hatchlings London, and tonight we'll be covering a practical guide to reinforcement. So welcome. Tonight we'll cover who we are, what is reinforcement. We'll give you some examples of different types of reinforcement and some strategies to help you manage and better utilize reinforcement to strengthen behavior and work towards better outcomes. And there'll be time, as always, for questions at the end of tonight's presentation. So hi, and thank you for joining. This is I think we're up to 7 or 8 in our webinar series where we're chatting about all aspects of early childhood and behaviour and development. And so tonight we've got Kaylin Smilak and myself, Jessica Bowman, hosting, and we're 2 of the directors at Hatchling London. We're early childhood development and behaviour consultants as well. We also have Erin Valenti as one of our directors and early childhood consultants, but she's currently on maternity leave. But she'll be joining us again in September, so we're very much looking forward to that. So tonight we'll just get things kicked off because I'm a bit of a chatter. So reinforcement. Reinforcement involves consequences that strengthen behaviour. To strengthen a behaviour means to increase the likelihood that it will occur again in the future. We use reinforcement to strengthen behaviours that we want to increase. So what this really means, I think a lot of people use the word reinforcement and reward interchangeably, but reinforcement is kind of like rewards with a goal in mind. It's not just about just giving rewards, but it's about rewards that work towards strengthening a specific behavior. So there are 2 main types of reinforcement. We have positive reinforcement. That's when you add something after a behavior to increase the likelihood of the same behavior happening again. And negative reinforcement is when you remove something after a behavior in order to increase the likelihood of that same behavior happening again. So reinforcement is all about strengthening behaviors. In behavioral terms, if we want to weaken a behavior, we call that punishment. And the positive and the negative aspects are about what we add or take away from the situation. It's a little bit tricky, but we're just going to mainly focus on positive reinforcement tonight, so you won't need to worry too much about negative reinforcement. So a really common question that we get is, isn't reinforcement just bribery? Am I just bribing my children through the day? So what reinforcement is it's proactive and planned. So it doesn't happen just on the cusp of, just in the moment. You have a plan, you execute it, and you follow through. It's always, always, always delivered with praise, and reinforcement creates lasting positive change. So this is that something improves or a behavior strengthens over time, rather than there's just giving reinforcement and that nothing changes. In a reinforcement, the adult's always in control, and rewards are earned as an incentive for doing a job well done. This is really in comparison to bribery, where reinforcement is, or the response is reactive. It's given in response to challenging behavior. So the situation kicks off and then you start to discuss reinforcement, whereas reinforcement is much more about, okay, first you do this, then this will happen. Bribery changes behavior in the moment, but not over time. And that's kind of a really important thing to think about. It's not about momentary change. Reinforcement's about long-term change. And this is one that we talk to adults about all the time as well. One of the main differences about identifying and kind of in a very gut feeling way, is this reinforcement or is this bribery, is who's in control. So in bribery, often the child's in control and it involves negotiating with the child, whereas in reinforcement, the adult's in control. They make decisions about if and when something has been earned. So that's kind of the main difference between reinforcement and bribery. And at the end of the day, the kind of thing we tell people is that control aspect. So if you feel like the child's in control, it's probably bribery. And if you feel like you're in control of the situation, it's most likely reinforcement. So what makes a good reinforcer or a good reward? So it's personalized. Reinforcers different from person to person. So it means a good reinforcer is specialized to the person who's being reinforced. So what that really means in practical terms is that what reinforces me might be what different to what reinforces you. So I might love ice cream and chocolate and you might not, and so if I'm going to reward you after dinner, I wouldn't give you ice cream and chocolate, I give you fruit or salty food or whatever it is that reinforces you, and I give myself chocolate. So that's kind of the thing, is that you have to think about what reinforces the person or the child that you're working with and making sure that you keep it specific. Just because we think something is generally good doesn't mean it's reinforcing to that individual, because they might not care about it, might not carry the same weight for them. Good reinforcers are quick to deliver, so they happen at the time of the behavior and not after a delay. So this is a really tricky one, and one that we see especially for early learners, that time and that quick delivery in the moment, especially for your toddlers and preschoolers, is really, really important. Unfortunately, for a 2-year-old, a 30-second delay can be all the difference between it being a reinforcer and just delivering a random object to them. They might not be making the connection between their behavior and the reinforcer. So that, especially for our younger learners, keep it really, really, really quick. With reinforcers, we always add praise. Even if social praise isn't necessarily obviously reinforcing to your learner, it still doesn't mean that we don't add it, because what we're doing is pairing up, okay, good things happen, here's something good, and I say good things. And what you tend to find is that delivering that kind of contingency altogether kind of increases the effect of the reinforcer, and eventually you can often fade out those physical items and those tangible reinforcers, and then you end up just with praise itself being the reinforcement. And reinforcers always need to be effort matched. So what this is the size or the value of the reinforcer should match the behavior. So things that are already established and easy behaviors should get a little bit of praise, a high five here, well done, that sort of thing. Whereas a new or tricky behavior might require extra reinforcement. So this could be something like, some extra bubbles, or some time with the Play-Doh, or access to that train that they absolutely love playing with, for new and challenging behaviors that children kind of are exhibiting, that they've really put in the hard work and they're really showing that they're putting in the effort. Then we effort match our reinforcement to what's been going on, and that's kind of the way that we could create this kind of sliding scale of reinforcement for children. So what should we bear in mind when we're choosing a reinforcer? So a really easy way is to just sit down, put out some toys, and see what your child gravitates towards in their play. Some children love sensory play, and they might always gravitate towards the Play-Doh and the sand. Other children might gravitate towards the trains or the house building, or other children might gravitate towards the puzzles. It's really different for each child, but just by putting out some different types of play and watching how they choose to move through the play, how long they engage for an item, how they use it, that can give us some really great ideas about where to start looking for reinforcers. So once you've identified some of these toys and objects that your child's really interested, we want to limit some of the access to strengthen the value of the reinforcer. So essentially, if you have access to chocolate and chips all the time, they're not exciting and reinforcing. And that we want to use that same principle with toys and objects and things in the child's environment. So if they always have access to that amazing train that makes the bubbles and the noises and lights up, then after a while, if they're playing with that day after day after day, it's likely to lose its value. So having the train out maybe once a week can really kind of strengthen the value of that reinforcer and keep it fresh and interesting for our kids as well. And ideally with reinforcers, they should have a natural end, or if they don't have a natural end, the ability to put a timed end in place. So what does that mean? So bubbles themselves are a really good example. So bubbles, you dip it in, you blow your bubbles, the bubbles will disappear, and that's the end of the reinforcer, and you can move on to your next activity or your next demand. And that's a natural end to the situation. You haven't had to go and grab anything off the child, had to engage in any of that sort of challenge. And so that gives a really natural kind of close to the reinforcer and ends everything on a really positive note. If you can't do that with the object, sometimes timers are a really valuable thing that we use, although I think we've discussed this in previous webinars. Not every child's into a timer. They do work really effectively for some children. So, okay, you can have a minute with the train, you put your sand timer or your visual timer up, and they get to play with it, and once the timer is finished, it goes away. And so it just gives a really natural flow to when we're delivering reinforcement, rather than having to be the grumpy adult that always goes in and says, no, okay, time to stop that, and let's move on to the next thing. So some examples of reinforcers. So we have our toddler group, which is kind of the main area that I work with. So songs and tickles, big winners in the toddler cloud. And again, they've got natural ends. You know, you can have 1 or 2 rounds of tickles, you can do a song and then move on. Bubbles, messy play, and that's a harder one with the timed ending. But what I tend to do is introduce new toys. And so, you know, we might add 1 more squirt of foam. We do things really slowly and build up the messy play, and with each kind of access providing that reinforcement. Slapstick humor, toddlers love silly things happening. Music, praise, some kids really like food, and tablets as well. So obviously I think tablets are pretty reinforcing to all people really. And so whilst we don't necessarily use them all the time, they're definitely something to have in our bag for when we really need them. And with the preschoolers, you can kind of move into more complex and more specific. So generally what tends to happen for preschoolers is they start to develop really strong preferences. This can be, you know, for particular types of play, it might be Paw Patrol, princesses, transport, and then we tend to theme reinforcers around these sorts of things. So it can be books, music, dance, specific toys. Again, that slapstick humor, music, praise, and tablets. But we tend to find that there are particular themes that preschoolers really love, and we pick our reinforcements based on these themes and interests. And for school-age children, again, they, a lot like preschoolers, have strong opinions. Often you can ask school-age children about what they're interested in, and they will tell you all about what they are, or maybe sometimes more usefully, what they aren't into. And with school-age children, it's really important to, if you can have that kind of discussion with them, to have it, because they don't like being babied, and that's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind. So making sure, again, books, music, dance, specific toys. One that we've listed here that we haven't under the other categories is breaks, and that's that kind of negative reinforcement we were talking about, which is where you remove something and that becomes a reinforcer. And a break is kind of a really nice example of that. So it's a removal from an activity to be able to have that alone time, and that's your reinforcement. And it can work really well with school children, especially if they're doing blocks of work followed by a free play break and things like that. And again, music, praise, and tablets. So where do we use reinforcement? So people who have been attending a few of these know that we use the ABC framework. And for those of you who are new this week, what that is antecedent, behaviour, and consequence. So an antecedent is anything that precedes or triggers a behaviour, such as a demand. Behaviour is the what happens, and the consequence is anything that follows the behaviour, such as praise or discipline. And then the consequence, the C, this is our opportunity to reinforce positive behaviours. So if we'll go through a couple of examples in a minute, but yeah, it's really focusing on that reinforcement is a consequence, and that's how it strengthens up a behaviour. So we'll do some home examples together. So the antecedent is you ask your child to put on their shoes to go to the park. The behaviour, your child, after a shorter than usual discussion, puts on their shoes. So what does this mean? This means that typically when I ask my child to put on their shoes, it takes 10 minutes of negotiation. But in this instance, it took us 2 minutes. And so that's pretty exciting for me, because I haven't had to waste another 8 minutes trying to get them to put their shoes on, the whole hoopla that comes around it. So I'm so impressed at this situation that I want to deliver some extra reinforcement. And what I do is I give my child a high five. I praise them with well done for putting on your shoes, so knowing exactly what it is they've done right. And we head straight to the park. We don't stop at the store on the way there. We don't just pop in to talk to one more person. And we really show them that when they put in their shoes and they listen, that we get to go straight to the place that they really like. And that's kind of the consequence for them. Another example, and this one's probably a little bit better for kind of our older children who have a little bit more cognizance of the situation. So the antecedent is you ask your child to put their dishes in the sink. The behaviour, your child puts their dishes in the sink immediately, which is fantastic. No negotiation, nothing, they've just put it straight in there. And the consequence, and this is where it's a bit better for older children, is you give your child extra time on the iPad before bath time. So this is just reinforcing that behavior, and you tell them, you know, when they put their dishes in the sink, you say, wow, I'm really impressed at how well you did that. I'm after bath time, we're going to have an extra couple of minutes on the iPad because I'm really impressed. And then as you give them the iPad, that was really impressive because you did put your dishes in the sink, you get extra time on the iPad, and just reminding them that that's what they're getting their extra time for. So home, it's about reinforcement, and positive reinforcement is all about reinforcing about what you want to see. It's about increasing positive behavior, not decreasing challenging ones. We will eventually cover challenging behaviors, but today we want to focus really on building positive behaviors by replacing challenging behaviors by reinforcing good ones. So that's, again, I think goes back to that tying the shoes example we talked about, which is, you know, normally there is a big hoopla about it, but today there wasn't, so extra reinforcement comes on those days. You also need to reinforce approximations, partial completions, and efforts, especially when you're teaching a new behavior. So if your child doesn't get it right, or they only partially complete the activity, but they normally don't do it at all, or they normally don't even try, then reinforce them. Reinforce that effort and that extra effort they've put in for the situation. So some school examples, and I think Kaylin will chime in here a little to help us out with these ones. So I'll just talk them through, and then we can chat about the consequence and that sort of thing with you, Kaylin. So antecedent, you ask your child to complete an activity at the table with you. The behavior is the child comes to the table and partially completes the activity. And the consequence is you quickly give the child access to a favorite toy they love to play with and praise them. So I think this is a pretty straightforward one, actually. So again, this is maybe a child who doesn't like to come to the table, that really struggles to complete an activity, that you haven't managed to engage at the table really well, has a bit of a negative history with it. And if you do, they do come to the table really nicely. I think this is one thing we really see in a lot of schools, is that maybe because you're just so kind of taken by the fact that they've decided to join you, that we forget to reinforce them for that great behavior. And so as soon as they finish or partially complete the activity, even though they didn't do the whole thing, you want to go and find out one of their favorite toys, deliver it to them, and give them lots and lots of praise for that extra effort. Kaylin, did you have anything extra to add there?
No, I think that was quite straightforward, but I think it's just thinking about a lot of that social attention, so how we can really make it special for the child and see that we, you know, I think a lot of this also reinforcement goes alongside with confidence and really strengthening the confidence in the child. So when we're offering the social attention by providing more praise and also providing them with toys as well, as a tangible, I think that's you know, building and strengthening that confidence in the child to hopefully have the behavior occur again.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make about confidence, Kaylin. Thank you very much. So next one is, I think, a bit more, again, pegged at our older children and school-age children. So the antecedent is you ask a child to sit on the carpet and listen to the story with the class. The behavior, the child listens to you and sits on the carpet. Consequence, give the child a star on their star chart and move them up the superhero chart or dojo points or whatever it is that your school system's using. And so I think in this example, we really focused on this sitting on the carpet and less on the listening to the story, because maybe this child has a history of drifting around the classroom and not engaging, or not particularly following instructions, maybe given it at a group level. So you want to really reward that new behavior that you've seen, where the child's actually listened and sat on the carpet, and engage them in that kind of class-wide system that you're using to reinforce behavior. Kaylin?
Yes, definitely. I think this is a great example too. We see this a lot in schools, and as a teacher, I've seen it in general. I think thinking about really what the behavior looks like. So as Jess said, we're looking at the sitting on the carpet. So step one is just to get the child to join the group and to think about what is everyone else doing around us and how can we get them to be receptive to understanding kind of the social thinking of the dynamics of the classroom. So step one is getting them to the carpet. We're going to reward them for that using praise. This example using the star chart, moving them up the superhero chart, kind of whatever system really works. And then, you know what, the next step is we'll work on them sitting and listening for extended amounts of time. Kind of breaking it up in steps is also how we can deliver the reinforcement quickly, and make it also manageable so that the child is learning, and hopefully, as I said before, the behavior occurs again.
Brilliant. And I think that was a really good point to make about breaking things up into small steps and reinforcing each step along the way. You know, if you've got a child who really struggles with the whole chain of events, then make sure you're reinforcing them at each interval, and really building up that kind of positive system around them. And that will really set you up for a lot more success in these things. So at school, we use a lot of first then language, and it's a really easy way for children and teachers and anyone who's supporting a child to really keep reminding themselves about that first challenging activity, then reinforcement time. It's a really nice visual to help remind children and to help remind ourselves as well. You know, sometimes we do forget to deliver these things, and a first then with a clear visual reminds us as much as the child. We always want to add praise to all forms of reinforcement, keeping in mind that praise might not be meaningful enough for some children. And this is a really common one we see, where children are being praised, but maybe that praise hasn't been, you know, they hear a lot of it and they might not be as important to them. Not everybody is as socially motivated as each other. And so for those children who struggle more with this motivation, some extra reinforcement in the form of toys or books or, you know, whatever that child is interested in can be really helpful. Again, just like at home, we want to reinforce partial completions and the effort a child has put into the task, and we want to reinforce all those small steps along the way. And always remember to keep the reinforcement proportional to the task. So keeping that special train with all the lights and bells and whistles for the really big effort and the really big new behaviors, and not delivering it every single day, every 30 minutes, where it can kind of lose its value, like it would for anybody who is constantly accessing their favorite reinforcer. So some
Just
things to
quickly,
sorry.
I was just something on top of the praise, thinking about, I think in the classroom too, like even non-verbal communication is really positive. A smile, a nod, a thumbs up, those types of non-verbal praise are types of praise, and they're really giving that child a confidence boost. And you know what, I'm looking at you and I notice that you're doing something, but even though I'm not telling you, just a smile can really reinforce that child to, you know, follow what you're asking them to do, follow the group. And then secondly, just thinking about providing activities or privileges, things about playing, such as playing games, sitting in a special spot, helping the teacher with with an activity, or helping the teacher tidy up or put the pencils on the table. Those types of things can also be really rewarding to children. Having extra computer time, or, you know, time at the gym or things like that. So I think that's really important when we're thinking in the classroom setting.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Kaylin. So some things to remember, and actually one thing that we do normally tell all of the parents and teachers that we work with that we haven't mentioned today and isn't on this slide, is that all of us work for reinforcement. I think especially when we were going back to that earlier point about bribery versus reinforcement, people always often talk to us about, well, I don't want to reward my child for every single activity, like that's not how life is. But actually, if you take a step back and have a look, often as adults, we all work for reinforcement. It's just our reinforcement might be different to what a child's is. You know, you work at work for good reviews, you work at work for your paycheck at the end of each month. These are all types of reinforcement. There's things that follow a behavior that increase the likelihood. So when you get paid, you're more likely to turn up at work the following week. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that reinforcement is just a really technical way of looking at something that happens for all of us, and it's just really systemizing that and using it as a useful tool in our teaching and behavior management toolbox. So some things to remember is to keep reinforcement personalized to each child. So that's like really making sure that, you know, if trains are really interesting to one child, they might not be to another, and that child might need butterflies or princesses as their reinforcement, just making sure that you're kind of meeting those interests of each child. Quick delivery is key. This is especially important in our early learners. So, you know, our toddlers and preschoolers, any delay can really kind of fade away that chain, and can lessen the effectiveness of our reinforcers. We always want to add praise to our situation, so we always want to add that praise no matter what we're doing, even if you're giving a tangible, great job, I love the way you did that. We want to reinforce our children during teaching and during new skills. We want to catch a child in the moment when they're performing the correct behaviour. So positive reinforcement is always about adding something extra when we see things that we want to keep seeing. So it's not about decreasing negative behaviours, but really strengthening those positive behaviours. And often as we strengthen positive behaviours, the more challenging behaviours often drop away. And we want to always focus on the positive behaviour, and we're all about positive behaviour here at Hatchlings London, and making sure that we always catch our children being good, that we're always being really specific towards them, and that we always want to reward them for doing a good job or for trying or for being cognizant of the situation. Kaylin, do you have anything else to add there? Oh, she seems to have dropped off for a moment. Not a problem, we'll keep going. So one thing to remember is that support is always available. You speak to your child's teacher, your Senko, or other professionals who might be involved with your child. This can be an OT, speech and language, psychologists. All of these people are really aware of positive behaviour, and reinforcement is a really common technique used in pretty much every school, whether they're mainstream or special needs or any type of environment. And it's a really easy strategy to talk to people about, and they can really help give you some pointers. As always, the Hatchlings team are available for consults or to help for more in-depth and specific support, especially we get some kind of curvy questions out there, which we love answering, so please keep sending them through to us. You can book through our website or drop us an email at contact@hatchlingslondon.co.uk. So now, just give me a second to pull up questions from this evening, and we'll see what we can find and what we can help with. Give me one moment. Oh. Okie dokie. So, what have we got here? My child doesn't want to try new foods a lot of the time. How can I use positive reinforcement or reinforcement to help get this going? So I think this is a really common one that we use positive reinforcement for at Hatchlings, is to help get new behaviours established around feeding regimes. So we find that lots of children have a pattern of refusal. So once you've done all the normal kind of feeding things, getting them used to new foods on the plate, all of that kind of stuff, the next hardest step is getting your child to kind of put something new in their mouth. And the way that we use reinforcement is we do a first then. First you lick the broccoli, then you can have a sweet potato chip, or first you chew the piece of sausage, then we can play with Paw Patrol. And these are all recent examples that I've been working with a client on. So what we've got is we had a pair of boys who really struggled to try new foods. It wasn't that they liked a variety of tastes and textures, so there didn't seem to be any sensory challenges there after talking to our OT. So we determined that it was mainly about behaviour. And so we put in place a really structured reinforcement program using a combination of natural reinforcers, so foods that they already liked mixed in with foods that they weren't so keen on, and then as well as external reinforcers, so watching some Thomas, access to Paw Patrol toys, and so we really balanced those two together, and we did a little bit of first try this, then have that, and it's a really structured way to deliver reinforcement that can really help kind of achieve the kind of change that people are looking for. So that's kind of a big one that we've been working on. It's a really easy way to use reinforcement. It's just, again, about breaking your task into tiny, tiny, tiny activities. So you can't go from your child won't even tolerate broccoli on their plate all the way up to my child will eat broccoli. There are lots of little steps that we can reinforce along the way. I can reinforce my child for allowing broccoli on their plate. I can reinforce my child for smelling the broccoli. I can reinforce my child for touching the broccoli. And once you've got all of these behaviors kind of going, then you can reinforce your child for licking the broccoli. You can reinforce your child for chewing the broccoli. You can reinforce your child for swallowing the broccoli. And whilst it sounds like lots and lots of little steps, actually, as you build them up over time, change happens much more quickly than you would assume, especially with things like feeding, where you've got 2 or 3 opportunities in a day. So that's kind of a really nice way to think about reinforcement. And if you think about it, a natural mealtime has a similar kind of flow. You know, first I eat my main, then I have my dessert. And we're just kind of breaking that down to an even smaller and more individual level so that we can further reinforce each individual step and establish a new behavior of eating broccoli. Here we go. If you provide a reward to reinforce, will the child expect that reward for the same behavior next time? Really depends on the child. Some children will definitely expect that and they might have clued up to it. This really also depends on age and how explicit you are about it. When we're establishing new behaviors, we kind of want to see them for 3 or 4 days in a row consistently before we fade a reinforcer. But one thing you can help to kind of not get in the cycle of a child expecting the same reward each time is changing up our reinforcers. So, you know, they might get bubbles one time, the next time they might get a book, the next time they might get a toy. And so really mixing things up consistently with your reinforcement can kind of overcome that challenge. They're always probably going to, initially when you're establishing a new behavior, definitely in the first week or 2, they'll probably want the extra effort. But that's also why we always talk about adding praise to the situation. So if you add praise, what you're doing is they get the item and they get the praise. They get the item, they get the praise. And what we do is we kind of choose a less kind of exciting item. So after, you know, 3 or 4 days we've done really well, it might have been in the truck with all the bells and whistles, but actually now we know they can do it. They're doing really well with it. And so we might drop it down to just some bubbles and praise. Or we might do that for another week, and then we might just drop it down to praise. And at that point, you've delivered a really natural reinforcer to your child. You know, we all enjoy and love praise, and we all work hard for it at work, in our personal lives, in our family lives. And so that's kind of the progression. And that's one thing that we really focus on, is that, you know, reinforcers aren't forever. You know, we always work towards natural social praise, but, you know, some children do need the extra support to get things going, and they do need to be faded out softly and gently. So yeah, your child, it's a complex question, but yeah, sometimes your child will expect that reward, but you can also kind of overcome that issue by keeping it a little bit unpredictable for them. So great question, thank you very much.
And something to add to that too, when we're thinking about some of the rewards, I just mentioned it before earlier, I think a little bit of, we call them in the behavioral realm, preference assessment. And I think that can often change day to day. So when we're thinking about strengthening the behavior, we can give them a choice between 2 objects that we already know are highly motivating for them and use those as a reward. It kind of cuts the negotiations, cuts the choices, and really helps them have a clear, definitive knowledge of knowing which they're going to get, and it kind of helps them with the expectation of, you know, what the reward might be, on top of course, you know, looking at social praise and all of those other ways of reinforcement.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Kaylin. And let's see, I think we've got time probably for one more question. Give me a second, we'll find one.
I had a question, sorry, just quickly, I wanted to add this. It was really interesting the other day. I was in a nursery and they were asking whether reinforcement, if you provide, you know, children should naturally know to do certain things such as sharing, and providing social reinforcement constantly after sharing a toy isn't really, you know, I guess that particular person didn't feel it was necessary. And it was a really great question, because I think we deal, a lot of this, and it's really finding the balance. I think it's knowing, all right, we're not going to, after every single behavior, but if you're trying to strengthen particular behaviors in children that are not already motivated to do these things, where they find sharing is very difficult, where they find sitting on the carpet is very difficult, it's really important that we're using high reinforcers and providing that reinforcement so that we strengthen it. So I very much understood the question, and most children, yes, that is a very true. But I also think it's really important that we make sure we're teaching, we always talk about teaching the appropriate behavior or the expected behavior that we want them to learn.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well, Kaylin. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Making that call, and kind of, sometimes different children need different approaches in nurseries, and that's a really hard one to balance against the expectations of the classroom as well. That's kind of one that we encounter as well. I think a bit like, well, if I praise this child, do I have to praise all of the others? I think that's where it's keeping in mind that reinforcement is really personal to the individual. So just because one child might need an extra 5 minutes with a train doesn't mean that another child, to get the same level of reinforcement, needs the same reinforcer. A high five and a well done, I'm so proud, and a sticker might get you exactly the same outcome with another child. And that's kind of the thing. I think people sometimes worry that they have to deliver the same level of reinforcer, but keeping in mind that the value of the reinforcer is different to each individual, and that works just as much for children as it does for adults. So I think that's all we've got time for tonight. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Kaylin, or are we?
No, I think that's great. I think we have touched on a lot of areas. And please, if you do have any further questions, if you didn't have them this evening, please email us. We're always very happy to answer more questions. And yes, I think that's it.
Brilliant. So we'll be sending out a short survey after this. Please complete it if you can spare the time. We use all the information to improve our webinars and deliver the content that you guys all want to see. For everyone who completes our survey, we will be sending out a free resource related to the weekly webinar within the 24-hour period afterwards the survey is complete. So thank you from the whole team tonight. You can visit us at our website, hatchlingslondon.co.uk, on YouTube, where we post all of our previous webinars, and on Facebook as well. So next week, we will be covering Lego-based therapy. So Erin and myself, Jessica, are licensed Lego-based therapy training providers, and so we deliver training to schools and organizations, as well as our own direct training open to the public on Lego-based therapy, and it's something that we get questions on all the time, so we thought we'd host a webinar next week just to let you all know, and that will be our last one before we break for the summer, but we'll be back in the last week of August to get things kicked off before the school year starts. So thank you very much for attending tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next week for our last one, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks very much.